I started my career in software and weapons systems back in the Air Force after going through Yukon and ROTC, and worked on weapons systems such as anti-satellite, and I was the test program manager for that weapon system with the F-15. I was also a satellite at Space Command, which is now considered Space Force, I guess. That's what they've changed the name to. Went over to work at Lockheed on a tri-service stealth cruise missile, and also after that decided to go commercial and worked for Anderson Consulting and then various other folks after that. Ended up working for two FFRDEs. One was MITRE, one is the Software Engineering Institute, who is half of the author of this wonderful CMMC model. So I did 7 years there working on models and helping them out with metrics. Right now, last 20 years, I've been a CMI lead appraiser, 22 years ISO lead auditor for 27,000, 9,000. So I do a lot of process improvement, not just going in and doing appraisals, but helping people understand their business objectives and how to measure them. Not like, okay, we want to be the best in the world. A lot of the CMMI methodology is being reused. The taxonomy, the codification, the assessment methods are all basically 90% the same that we have been using for the last 20 years in CMMI. So there's not a lot of big difference, and it works, so why not reuse it, right? Right, the DFARS and the FARs, I see those in the NIST 800-171 and the handbook as the controls that you now are looking for cybersecurity, as opposed to just a methodology for process improvement. It's process improvement for cyber, and that's what the NIST brought to the table. The beauty of CMMC is it's not like ISO where you have one lead auditor who could be in a really bad mood that day. It's more a team. You have to have, for level one, of course, the way that we were taught in provisional assessor course was that one person, the lead assessor or the certified assessor, could do the level one. For two, you have to have two team members. For level three, you have to have three team members. Sorry. What it means is that I, as the lead assessor, cannot, or lead appraiser in CMMI, it's not up to me. I'm here to make sure we ethically follow the rules, that we follow all the guidance, the ethics, the rules on how to do the assessment. That's my job, is to make sure it's done correctly. And I also am charged with making sure that the team members are correct, that the people that are on the team are also divided by what their expertise are or what they're good at. But again, it's corroboration at the end, it's collaboration, and we have to get together at the end of the assessment, when all is said and done, when we've looked at everything, we've tested everything or tested what we think is applicable, we've interviewed the correct people, we've looked at the right documentation, the team gets together and collaborate. It's the old storming, forming, norming rule for teams. So again, that's the beauty, I think, of a CMMI appraisal and a CMMC assessment, is that it's a team goal. It's a team, end of stage as you get the results. It's not me deciding what this organization is. Yeah. CMMC, somebody in organizations seeking certification, the wonderful acronym that they decided to come up with, OSC, which I thought was pretty funny. Organizations seeking certification would call, the C3PAO, and the C3PAO would say, hey, we have somebody here, we have a registered a provisional assessor or a certified assessor. What do you need? And so my job as the assessor is to scope out what they want. How large are they? How many people do they have in the organization? What their mission is? Do they have SCIFs? Do they have, are they supporting military? Are they, somebody doing tax or HIPAA preparation? So what level do they think they want? What's your mission? What's your goals? Who do you have in place? Do you have a facility security officer? Do you have a security officer who writes a security plan? Things like that. You want to kind of feel them out and scope out what they have already, if anything, because that's the one thing people will call me and say, no, we don't have anything yet. We were hoping you would give us templates for everything. And it's like, you can do it yourself. You can, like you said, just get somebody who's been doing the NIST SPs forever. And there's a lot of smart folks out there who can really help you, and you don't need to go to the level of a certified assessor. And when you want to do the actual assessment, this is the kind of conversation that I normally have with somebody called a sponsor, who's the person who is, either the CEO, the COO, the CIO, or maybe even lower, depending if they just want one organizational unit. We call them organizational units. this is the scope. Like if Lockheed calls tomorrow, I know they're not going to want all of Lockheed Martin looked at. They're going to have maybe this one organization, maybe up in Utica, New York, who makes, a nav system for some plane somewhere. And that's what we would limit our scope to. So you really want to scope it out. Again, with what they're building, the people involved, the mission of the organization. Maybe it's a site visit, maybe it's just a group within a site. You can chunk it up however you want, but that's how you say, okay, this is our scope. You put a box around it. And that's where you have your conversation to say, this is what we're going to look at. This is who we're going to interview. These are the documents we need to look at. And then you start setting the stage for saying, okay, I need somebody on site also to be the site coordinator who will be my interface. Because, usually your CIO, your CTO, or the sponsor is going to be too busy to tell me, what rooms do we have to interview people? What kind of connectivity do we have to support the team coming in? Can we bring our own laptops? I mean, there's so much logistical information that I have to deal with the site coordinator to find out who's available. Can we interview them? What are their dates that people are interviewed? Then I have to manage the team also. We're making sure that the team is correct. We're making sure the organization is ready. And another thing that you're supposed to do in the phase 1 of an assessment is to do a readiness review. And that's where I will look at the documentation, because that's one of the 3 things that you have to look at, for evidence, for objective evidence, to make sure that they have what they're supposed to have. I would look at all their documents, their standards, their specifications, as it says in the guidance. So I want to see if you have it, because if you don't have specifications, Greg, there's nothing. You're not going to have enough to go further for the on-site phase 2, where we do interviews and we ask for testing or demonstrations. So for phase 1, I'm still asking for documentation for the readiness review. At the end of a readiness review, the whole team takes part in that, and we corroborate at the end, or collaborate at the end, to make sure we are ready. We give the sponsor a go, no-go decision to say, yes, you have all the documentation, everything looks good, you have procedures, you have processes, you have policies, we looked at all the specifications, and it looks like you have that. Now, then I would say we're going to go to phase 2, which is where we interview. As far as we know it today, there's a phase 1, which is getting everything ready. That's the planning phase. And the idea is to have conversation, first contact with C3PAO, the assessor, the organization, and set up the scope of the assessment, meet with the sponsor of the assessment at the assessed organization or the organizational unit, if it's part of the assessment, look at who's going to be involved, both at the organization and on the assessment team. You have to have, either RPs or assessors on the team. They have to be, trained, et cetera, get all that. Have a readiness review during phase 1, and that would be looking at the specifications, doing the touching, doing the looking at, you have everything, you have your processes, your procedures, your policies, and then that go, no go decision would be made at the end of phase 1 to say, yes, you are ready, let's go on with phase 2. We've done all the planning, we've done all the logistical activities that we have to make sure there's no constraints. Everybody's available for both the team and the organization being spoken to for their interviews, for their verbal conversations. And the first thing you would have for phase 2 is an opening briefing I would give to the organization to explain exactly what's going to happen. So the phase 2 goal is the actual, what we call conduct the assessment. Okay. We lovingly call it the on-site part, where we have to be there on site and we interview and have discussions and demonstrations and or tests to get corroboration on the specifications that we looked at during the readiness review. So that's where your 2 sources of data come through. And again, you want to ask people, you don't want to tell them, oh, I saw your facility support documentation. You want to say, how do you document? How do you manage your project for the facility? How do you have access control? You kind of assume that they have these things, so you don't say, hey, I saw your access control procedure. That's really good. That's not how you want it. You want to ask open-ended questions, not yes, no questions. Please explain to me how you maintain access control to your SCIF. Or please explain to me how you keep track of your badges when people come in. How do you know if they have to be escorted? Do you do background checks? Please show me those type of documents if you still need documents to look at. So that's part of the conduct. You're scoring, you're talking to all the folks who actually do the work, getting from them, you try to have a conversation and get from them the information of how they do their job, basically. And the whole team is in on these interviews. Everybody takes copious notes. People who are not on the team or not being interviewed are not allowed in that meeting because we have the confidentiality and non-attribution agreement. In other words, we don't want people to be scared to say what's going on for fear of being, I guess, fired and or saying the wrong thing. And this is something that happened way back when with CMMI is we promise we will never repeat. Phase 3 is the reporting. As you know, one of the documents or the products that come out of an assessment is a report sent to your C3PO, me as an assessor, and that tells them the findings, what happened, what we looked at, the scope again, we go over that, and we talk about these are your results, met, not met, et cetera, for whatever is part of that assessment that we looked at. Usually the sponsor gets the copy and he or she is the owner of the report. Phase 4 is actually remediation and adjudication if the organization doesn't agree with it or wants to redo it or has some, once the AB approves or denies it, then a 90-day clock starts. As far as we know today, no. It could be not applicable. In other words, you're not that this something in access control or something in risk management or something in configuration management, something you just don't have to do. That's up to the assessor and the organization to determine what is not applicable. I wouldn't ever want to claim too much not applicable because that raises red flags. You need to really have coverage for every practice that's in there. Say looking at a level 1, somebody wants to become level 1. For access control, you've got 4 practices, right? There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. So I would look at all 4 practices and determine if those practices are implemented. There's always going to be a goodness. There's always going to be, human subjectivity. So for me, I want to see the specifications. I want to talk to the people who do the work. And then if there's some way to get like a demo, like a test, if I'm not sure, or the team, I shouldn't say it's a team of we, if we're not sure whether or not they have the documentation, the person talked about how they do their job, which led to say, yeah, I use this for access control. We have a log, we have badges we give out, we do security checks, we do background checks. But let me see how you would do a background check. Let me see the type of tool you have to invoke that. Do you have configuration management on that tool with the people's names, and show me that you have a contract with somebody else who's going to do the background check for you. Inherent controls. So again, that's part of your whole, I've hired somebody to do that kind of a deal. So if you hired, like I mentioned, background checks, you're not going to sit there as a company and do your own background checks because that's probably not your business. But you want to make sure people have them for access control so that they don't go where they're not supposed to, or they are not allowed access to information that you don't want them to have access to, depending on who they are and where they, et cetera, what they've done. But so if you hire somebody who does background checks, that's basically you're inheriting what they do to perform the background checks. So if they're the ones that are doing the work for you, in this instance that you just mentioned, I'd want to look at the contract you have with them. I would want to make sure that they have controls in place that they can, at least have in documentation. And you've done due diligence in hiring this company to make sure they're not the hole that people are going to get in through the back door. I mean, do you remember when Target was hacked? It was about 6-7 years ago, I believe, and they found out it was a subcontractor who was supplying Target with lights for their buildings. They got into the Target system somehow, and that's how they stole customer data, MasterCards and Visa numbers, et cetera, et cetera.